Good afternoon. We're going to roll right into the big show with these three fantastic writers in front of us. There's plenty of room up close if anybody wants to sit a little closer to the action. My name is Bill Kerwin. I teach down the road at the University of Missouri, Columbia, and it's a great pleasure to be a part, even a very tiny part, of this great event celebrating Charles Fanning. The three people speaking now, giving readings, are people you've heard a lot about over the past 2 days. You've already gotten introductions, so I'm going to be a bit brief. Charlie Fanning, the magisterial sort of father of Irish American studies, has written a large number of works, of course, and spawned a large number of great faculty members who have carried on his tradition, some of whom we've heard today, people whom he's influenced. He is well known, of course, for celebrating the work of writers like James T. Farrell and Finley Peter Dunne. His famous book, The Irish Voice in America, 250 Years of Irish American Fiction, has been mentioned numerous times. Alice McDermott, we just got a nice survey of her career, so I think you've been hearing about her, so the shortness of my introduction bears no relation to my respect for her fine work. I went years without reading her award-winning 1999 novel because the title is the phrase my sister tormented me with heavy irony as a child, that is Charming Billy, although said with a lot of sneering. But I just bought Someone. I'm looking forward to reading that, and I hope you will and indulge in her work. Her books will be for sale outside afterwards. And finally, Terence Winch has written 9 volumes of poetry, including This Ship Has Sailed, his most recent, which I believe he's reading from this afternoon. He moved to D.C. early in his working life and became part of the mass transit reading series, building up a poetic community in D.C., a poetry community. And he's continued to work in D.C. He was working at the Smithsonian Institution for 20-some years as head of publications at the National Museum of the American Indian. He also has a young adult novel called Seeing Eye Boy, about a 12-year-old Irish-American boy in New York City, born close to the time that he was born, I do believe. And that book would make a great gift if you have a young one who wants to read about the Irish in America. So that's Seeing Eye Boy. So with no further ado, Charlie Fanning is going to lead us off.
Hi all. Thanks to everyone for coming out. This gives me a chance to thank those who came from far away and near to participate in this. I'm much touched by all of these festivities, and I have to thank particularly the committee here, and even more particularly Eamon Wall, who is the best of friends and the best of organizers, and I'm blessed that these traits came together in aid of what's happened here yesterday and today. I wrote a novel, and it's something I always wanted to do, and finally I did it. And the novel's called The Music of What Happens, a novel of Chicago in the 1880s, and the title comes from an anecdote from the great Irish folk and mythic hero Finn, and I have the epigraph of my novel is James Stephen's version from about 1920 of that anecdote. Once, as they rested on a chase, a debate arose among the Fianna Finn as to what was the finest music in the world. "Tell us that," said Finn, turning to Usheen. "The cuckoo calling from the tree that is highest in the hedge," cried his merry son. A good sound, said Finn. And you, Oscar? He asked, what is to your mind the finest of music? The top of music is the ring of a spear on a shield, cried the stout lad. It is a good sound, said Finn. And the other champions told their delight, the belling of a stag across water, the baying of a tuneful pack heard in the distance, the song of a lark, the laugh of a gleeful girl, or the whisper of a moved one. They are good sounds all, said Finn. Tell us, Chief, one ventured, what you think. The music of what happens, said Finn. That is the finest music in the world. This novel is the coming-of-age story of a young boy. He's 12 years old when the novel opens, and he's taken by his father to the Parnell meeting in February 1880, where Parnell was on a fundraising tour for the Land League. And he came to Chicago, and there was a monster meeting there. And this is the boy's introduction to the wider world, really, because he lives down in Bridgeport, which is the Irish neighborhood south of the river. His name is Jimmy Farrell, and there's a reason for that. He's a kind of it's an obeisance to James T. Farrell and the work that he did so well for so many years. Most of the people in this book are historical characters, they're real people, and one of the most important is Francis O'Neill. He was an Irish immigrant from Cork to Chicago, where he had many back-breaking jobs and eventually went on the force and worked his way up to become chief of police of Chicago in about 1901. But his passion was Irish traditional music. And he played the flute, and he raised his son to play the fiddle. And he set out to collect the music, the traditional music of Ireland that he could find all around him in Chicago. And he often said that, you couldn't do this in Ireland, but here everybody comes from everywhere to the one place, to Chicago, and you could. So he set out to do this, to preserve the tradition. He was a kind of a latter-day Edward Bunting, if you will, the man who collected the music at the 1792 Harp Festival, the last great harp festival in Ireland, in Belfast, and published it as Bunting's music, and preserved a lot of material that way, a lot of songs and tunes that would not have otherwise stayed alive. So this is what O'Neill starts to do, and this culminates in 1903 with the publication of O'Neill's Music of Ireland, 1800 Tunes. And this book became the Bible, really, for Irish traditional musicians, both in Ireland and in America, for well on into the 20th century. I want to read a piece where O'Neill becomes Jimmy's mentor, and he gets him a job on the force, which he did for a lot of musicians. This was one of the things that he was able to do for people as he moved along himself. So he gets Jimmy on the force, and this is when Jimmy comes to work at the Central Police Station. He's 17 years old for the first time, and O'Neill introduces him around, and then it moves into the story of a collecting expedition that Francis O'Neill takes Jimmy on. So Francis shows Jimmy around, and then They do a little work, and then there's a lunch break. Over mugs of tea and ham sandwiches at the break, Francis explained how they collected the music. The keeper of a tune played it on his own instrument a few times. James O'Neill, a helper of Francis O'Neill, although no relation, put the tune down on paper, then played it back on his fiddle. Comments back and forth then followed, and they played the tune again and again until all present were satisfied. We don't even try to capture ornaments and grace notes on paper, James, Francis explained, for these vary so much, even from one performance to the next, that you'd as soon try to catch water in a sieve. Sometimes as well we can find only the barest bones of a tune with wide holes that need filling for anything at all to come of it. Or else there are competing versions with too many differences to settle easily. In those cases, he smiled, we convene the inquest committee, consisting of Barney Delaney, John Ennis, Eddie Cronin, and John here, he pointed to John McFadden. We meet, do you mind, not to bury a tune, but to bring it back to life. And so it goes on the way toward our goal of saving as much of the music as we can. Nodding seriously, Jimmy ventured to ask how the sergeant had come to begin this great and daunting project. Apologies to Pat and John here. They've heard this tale many times. The idea came into my thick head one evening shortly after I joined the force in the early 70s. My beat was Bridgeport and Hamburg, the roughest districts in the city in those days. Francis went on. On post one night, I heard the sound of a fiddle coming through the shutters of a rundown house over on Cologne Street. You know Cologne, I'm sure, James. 'Tis up against the docks along the South Branch, where there's often been ructions. Well, I knocked on the window, which was shut against the mist off the river, and there was an old man sitting there. I'd seen him on the street from time to time, using a long-handled shovel to pick up manure and refuse. He was called Dillon. For the life of me, I can't recall his given name. And he was from Kerry. Well, this Dillon lived on his own in the front room of the house. 'Twas all but falling down around him, sad to say. And he would sit up by the window, smoking his pipe and playing his fiddle. He'd named the instrument Jenny, and in truth, she was pretty much his only companion. The sergeant turned away, looked out the window, and back to his three listeners. The good Lord knows there were and there are many such folks all over Chicago whose music helps them get through the day and the night as well. And 'twas for the likes of them that I began harvesting tunes. Old Man Dillon is the name I gave to a lovely jit of his that I've heard nowhere else. He unfolded a sheaf of papers covered with notes and musical notation, then lay his flute beside them on the desk. Now, that's enough of the ancient history. Let's see what we can make of this new tune that we took away from last night's fun. McFadden picked up his fiddle, brought it into tune, and they began to puzzle out the notes. At the end of the hour, there had been some progress made, but Francis said they'd have another go tomorrow. As they were leaving the room, he held Jimmy back with a question. James, might you know Georgie West? He's a young man and a good fiddler, though he's never had a lesson. He's an orphan, lives with his brother's family down in Canaryville, and works as a cooper's helper in the yards, though not for long, I'm afraid. He's not fond of labor, and has also started a career as a small potatoes crook and chiseler, who we've had to haul in several times, though he's not yet 20. Musha, we can pick the music, but not them that plays it, as they say back home. In any case, Georgie has offered to take me one day next week to listen to a talented neighbor of his, Billy O'Malley, who also strays a bit to the far side of the law on occasion. I wondered, could you join me to try to get down whatever's on offer? I could, of course. I'd like nothing more, Sergeant. A week later, it was raining and already getting dark when Jimmy and Francis O'Neill hopped onto a car headed to the south side after work. As soon as they settled in, the sergeant began to talk about his own early life. Our townland of Trelabane in West Cork is 3 miles from Bantry and the sea, lad. I was the youngest of 7, and our home was full of music. My mother was an accomplished singer, with hundreds of tunes, many of which he taught to us. My father sang as well. He was a strong farmer, strong enough, thanks be, to get the family through the hunger, though 'twas dire and fearsome all around us. I was born in the famine year of 48. He shifted his weight on the bench, took out a pipe, and began to fill it. I turned into a passable scholar, if I do say so. I learned to read early, was good at the maths, and our neighbor Tim Downing taught me to play the flute. But I picked up the wanderlust as well. At 16, I made my way to the north of England and signed on as a cabin boy on the brig Jane Duncan, bound for Alexandria, the Black Sea, and points east. He shivered and pulled his coat tighter against the drafts in the car. I went on to see a passel of strange places, James. By the time I was your age, I'd been around the world twice. But my luckiest voyage was on a packet out of Liverpool carrying immigrants to New York. Among them was Miss Anna Rogers from Fecal, County Clare. We began writing letters, and she was ever in my mind from then on. Well, in 1967, I was aboard a ship in the Pacific that ran aground on a coral island in a storm. We were shipwrecked for 11 days. When we finally reached California, I vowed to leave the sea life and settle on dry land. I rambled around the States for 2 years, then came up to Chicago to work on the lake boats. As fate would have it, my Anna was living downstate in Bloomington. We were married in November of that first Chicago year, and we've been here ever since. I found work in the yards, trucking dressed hogs, pounding ice, shoving lumber, and loading freight cars. All hard labor, then as now, and for terrible low pay. And so I took the chance when it came of going on the force. In July of 1973 it was. And that, James, is my story. Jimmy felt privileged to have heard all this. It was clear the sergeant was fond of him. When they stepped down from the car and started walking, the rain was coming down harder. In a few minutes, they stopped in front of a handsome church with 4 soaring turrets. This was St. Gabriel's, the pride of Father Morris Dorney. Ah, yes, credit was due to the clever priest for getting this place built. A slight figure stepped from the shadows. Georgie West grinned and made a mocking half bow. "Welcome to Canaryville, friends," he said. "Let's be about our business." He wore a rumpled string tie, and a small cap framed his round face and big, charming smile. He was a bit hard around the eyes, though. He looked about Jimmy's age, which meant he was getting to be too old for the Bridewell. The next stop would be Joliet. They walked some blocks south and east into dark, deserted streets. Scraps of paper skidded around, and every few feet there was a sprung sidewalk board. Torn awnings flapped over shuttered or empty storefronts. The windows of the flats above were black or flickering with low gaslight behind ragged shades. They passed a stopped clock on a post. The smell of the stockyards was pervasive, sharp, breathtaking. "Don't be put off by appearances," Georgie laughed softly, "though you might not suspect it. Canaryville is well named. 'Tis fair to bursting with song." Halting in front of an alley in the middle of a block, he pointed. "Down here, men. Billy knows we're coming, but he'll never answer a knock at the front door, for reasons of his own." Into the black dark they walked. There was a scurry of tiny feet ahead. Rats for certain. 10 steps, then a turn to the left, then a rickety back stair heading up to the top of the building, with narrow landings instead of porches. Ducking under 2 lines of wash hung out into the blackness, they stopped before a windowless door. Georgie knocked softly twice. A small girl, maybe 6, opened the door a crack. Her hair was a jumble of blonde curls. Her wide eyes were bright blue, and there was a smear of jam on one cheek. A smaller girl with dark hair in braids stood behind her. "Hello then, Lily and Alice. Is your da to home?" said Georgie. "I'd say he's expecting us. Me, anyway." "He is, yes. Come through, Georgie." They went straight into the kitchen, lit dimly by a yellow gas light. A man, a woman, and 4 other children were sitting and standing around a deal table on which were a clutter of chipped plates and cups, crusts, and a puddle of tea. Despite a stove in the corner, the air was cold, and everyone had on shabby outside coats. It was stuffy as well. The room was windowless. Jimmy thought of their own flat in Blue Island Avenue, of his brother Michael. He shook his head to push away that memory. "And who's the company, Georgie?" said the man, thin and red-faced. His eyes were rheumy, and his graying hair lay flat over his ears and soiled collar. His gray-haired wife looked tired, resigned, unhappy. Her eyes were suspicious. The kids were silent and seemed apprehensive. There wasn't a smile in the room. "Musha, Billy, these are the lads who want to hear your music," Georgie replied. "Sergeant O'Neill and his colleague, James Farrell, a fiddler like yourself, who's brought his instrument along. Now, men, here's Billy and Kathleen O'Malley." The woman shifted in her chair at the word sergeant. Francis responded by taking out some coins and calling to the children, "Look at here, lads and lassies. I've just found these in my coat pocket. I've no idea how they got there. Would you take them off my hands, please, as a favor?" The smaller children looked at their mother, who nodded, her expression softening. They came out from behind the table, and Francis placed a 2-cent piece in each of their hands. Jimmy leaned in. "Mr. O'Malley, my mother's from West Clare and shares a name with you, Eileen O'Malley. She was, from near Kilkee." "Do you say so, lad? Kilkee, is it? Ah, the Clare coast is a great place for the music. Likely we're connected somehow, though we are far downers from Donegal. Here now, clear off the table, girls. William," he spoke to the tallest boy, "go out and get some beer from Dolan's. We'll have a bit of a session, will we not, Kathleen?" "We will, Bill." "Lily, would you fetch your da's own fiddle from the room beyond?" "Come hither, lads, sit over." O'Malley pointed to the chairs vacated by the children. The girl returned and placed her father's fiddle and bow before him on the table. He and Jimmy tuned up slowly while Francis looked on, humming to himself. "Let's start off with a set of tunes we both know, lad," Billy said. "Have you the reels Morning Dew, Travelers, and Shark's Favorite?" "I have them, yes, Mr. O'Malley," Jimmy answered. O'Malley tapped his foot 3 times, and they began playing together. At the switch over to the second tune, Lily and Alice stepped out in a figure. When they were finished, the tall boy was back with a growler, and Kathleen O'Malley set out 3 glasses and poured the beer. Jimmy took a drink, then said, "Here's a jig from my mother's home place." Thus exhorted, Billy O'Malley countered, "Here's one of mine from Gweedore." It was a bold slasher of a hornpipe. Jimmy and Francis looked at each other. Neither had heard that tune before. When O'Malley stopped, Francis asked him to play it again. Could James here play along, he asked, and could I make some notes? The fiddler looked up, his eyes narrowing with interest. Would I make money by it? Francis smiled thinly. I'd say no, nor will I, but 'tis an aid of keeping the music alive, passing it on, d'ye mind? O'Malley hesitated, then nodded. Fair enough, Sergeant. Scribble away. He picked up his fiddle, plucked a string, and began again. Jimmy watched and waited, then came in on the 9th bar. The man was a northerner, that was sure, for his playing was brisk, spare, and ringing. The fiddler was also missing a finger on his left hand. By God, you'd not have known that. You'd not have known the loss by his execution. But however had it happened, best not to ask. The musicians played through and repeated several of O'Malley's tunes, and when they seemed to be slowing down, Lily shouted out, Da! Could we do the Young Maidens? Could we, Da? Her sister joined in the plea, hopping up and down. The sergeant burst out laughing, slapped his knee. We could indeed, girls. Why, that tune was great in my own home place when I was a boy. Let's finish up with it. With the opening notes, all began to clap, and Francis sang out the first verse of the round. If all the young maidens were blackbirds and thrushes, if all the young maidens were blackbirds and thrushes, then all the young men would go beating the bushes. Fall the diddle-dido, whack fall the day. As the custom dictated, guests before hosts, Jimmy sang the second verse. If all the young maidens were hares on the mountain, then boys with their hounds would be out without counting. Then came Georgie West. If all the young maidens were rushes a-growing, then all the young men would get scythes and go mowing. Lily O'Malley went last, shouting out the verse while stamping her feet. If all the young maidens were ducks on the water, then all the young men would go swimming in after. Fall the diddle-dido, whack fall the day. Jimmy saw that the music had warmed the room and everyone in it. He hoped that some of this good feeling had soaked down into the other flats. At any rate, there'd been no complaints. As they were putting instruments away, Billy O'Malley slapped Francis on the back. You're welcome here any time, Sergeant. And I've not said those words in that particular order before, I can tell you. Outside, more rain was falling, and the three men picked their way slowly down the rickety staircase. At the bottom, Francis thanked Georgie for introducing him to the O'Malleys. As they were parting, he asked, how do they make their way, Georgie? Musha. Billy scrapes by, playing here and there at house dances and the odd wedding, much like myself, do you mind? We both being less than welcome in the parish halls. Francis smiled sadly. Georgievic, you've only yourself to blame for that. Thank you.
Thanks, Charlie. That was great. I'm going to read a couple of poems from That Ship Has Sailed, which they actually apparently have here now in the gift shop, but none of Alice's books. And then I'll read a couple of new poems. So, since we're in a museum, I thought I'd read the poem called At the Museum. The newest Smithsonian Museum is the National Museum of African American History and Culture, which I did some work on before it opened on some of their opening publications, but I hadn't gone to the actual museum until about a year after it opened. So this is at the museum. They keep the 14th century on the lower level. Then they work their way back up through slavery all the way to 2017. Elevator time travel wears you down. I go in the opposite direction, up where they keep the old suits and guitars, the sitcom scenes, the miraculous blasphemies that inspire us all. But pretty soon, I've had as much as I can take of all this anguish and heartache. So I walk to 14th Street. I crave pizza so bad. I wonder if the pizza place I used to go to years ago is still there in the food court. Then I'm reading the New York Times and eating my slice. The news is bad. The pizza is great. All travel is time travel. I'm leaving town on Thursday, but I'm returning in the future, which is now, O you who are reading this. And this is a poem called Country Music for a friend of mine named Howard Bass. And it was my attempt to sum up all the central themes of American country music in one poem, while rhyming and everything all the way through. It's about mothers dying, the hearse forever coursing up the hill to your house. It's raining, of course, and everyone has blue eyes, about which everyone else is always dreaming. Things are pretty bad and getting worse. The best you can do is drink and carouse and implore Jesus in that kingdom in the skies to bestow upon your vagrant soul a sense of meaning. Every love affair carries its own special curse, the universe intent on violating all our vows. You may have to shoot someone between the eyes to set things straight. Love is but anguish and scheming. When you die drunk with a broken heart, the keening starts with fiddle break and harmony chorus. That sounds like country music, doesn't it? This is a poem that I wrote, I think actually before Trump was even elected president, and definitely before COVID. So I'm not claiming to be prophetic, but, you'll see. Poor country. Oh, poor country, a big beast has slobbered all over you, and now you're so slimy. Poor country, remember how happy we once were with our trees and parks and little lakes filled with happy ducks? Now the concrete is cracked and the iron rusted. The eggs in fast food are not really eggs. The cops are killing us. The judge owns the prison they want to put us in. Our vote goes right into the shredder. We now can clone a monkey. We can fix a dead brain. We can sterilize 1 trillion mosquitoes. But at night, before we fall asleep, we weep for you, poor country. You are now a virus, and we have shut down all the hospitals. And I'll read one more from here. About 7 or 8 years ago, I started studying a little bit of Irish. Agus tá cúpla focal, ascuelga, homa, which is to say I have a couple of words in Irish. And my Irish teacher is a wonderful Corkonian named Jennifer O'Riordan, who I became very good friends with. But she moved to Greece with her Greek husband, so this was my farewell poem to her, called The Open Door. One day the trees will raise their arms up as you walk by, but that will just be me saying hello. If you hear music in the blue Aegean water urging itself toward the shore, that's a tune I'm working on for you, called Andoris Osculcha, or The Open Door. Those stones on the beach, I put them there for you to find, a way to keep me in mind. I'll listen for you with a shell to my ear, hoping to hear you sing a song about love, loss, memory, forgetting, or maybe one about a fox, a duck, a red rabbit. Your one habit I will never want to quit. I'll be by that door, waiting for your visit. And then a few new ones. The Irish Riviera was Rockaway Beach in Queens to those of us who grew up in the Irish community in New York, especially back in the 50s and 60s. It was an amazing place, and especially 103rd Street, which was all Irish bars from the boardwalk to the bay, and many of the greats of Irish American music play there. The McNulty family, and in particular, were the big stars. But there was one swanky hotel right on the boardwalk on 116th Street called Curly's Atlas Hotel. I've written a number of things about this place. My mother worked there as a waitress in the summer, and the staff was all Irish women. And my brother and I would meet her after work, and we'd walk home on the boardwalk and everything. Anyway, I was thinking of Curly's a few months ago, and I wrote this called Curly's Atlas Hotel. My brother got in his car and drove to New York. He was searching for an old hotel where our mother used to work. It's not there anymore, I tell him. It burned down. My brother never pays me any mind. Our sons come over for breakfast, washed down with ice water and coffee. They are so much more advanced than we are. I tell them drive carefully. I tell them to steer clear of ancient history. My mother won't budge. She stays put. She says, haven't I everything I need right here? We say, Mom, where are you? Please tell us, please. We're looking for your old hotel, the one that burned down. My father never uses bad language. He says, you dirty name. He says, shite. He says he loves cats, but our mother doesn't. He sleeps in a basement full of cats. We lug him around on a stretcher. Tomorrow, the year comes to an end. Mother, father, sister, brother, sons, and daughters. We will step forward in time. My sister promises to teach me new ways to cook a potato. My wife buys new sheets and a foot massager. She has a secret plan to escape to San Francisco and live in a cheap hotel on the water. I remain at the seashore, floating on a wave of forgetfulness. These poems are coming across much heavier than I intend. But anyway, Frank O'Hara was a great Irish-American poet, part of the first wave of New York school poets, along with John Ashbery and others. Died tragically at the age of 40, but had a big impact on a lot of contemporary American writers. And one of his most famous poems was The Day Lady Died, which was a poem about the death of Billie Holiday. And a lot of people have written imitations of this poem, and I am one of them. And I wrote this on the 9th of January last year, which was the day that Seamus Begley died. Seamus Begley was a member of the famous Begley family of musicians in County Kerry. Wonderful singer, Irish speaker, button accordion player, and a very, very funny guy. So I got the news that day that he died, and I wrote this, which is an imitation of O'Hara's poem, The Day Seamus Begley Died. It's 8:11 p.m. in Silver Spring, Maryland, a Monday, 8 days after New Year's Day. Yes, it's 2023, and I will go get a little bowl of raspberry sorbet, because I will go upstairs at 8:30 to my kitchen, and at 8:35 I will join my wife in the bedroom for TV, and she has just fed me a helping of pot roast, and the sorbet is a nice way to top that off. And I may check out bone and marrow on the kitchen table to see what Irish poets have been writing since the early Middle Ages. I went online to see if Mr. Singh at M&T Bank has deposited the huge bag of coins I dropped off there last week, and he hasn't. And I wonder if M&T is ripping me off. And then I get on Amazon and I order a cool Japanese knife for my brother Jesse, who's turning 80 on Thursday. And I think about giving him a collage I made, but I'm not sure he'd like it. And I'm looking forward to finishing a novel called Trespasses by Louise Kennedy. And I think about Brendan Behan and James Baldwin, who were my favorite writers in high school. And I reach down below my desk and lift up a bottle of Paddy's, and I fill a slender shot glass with this best of whiskeys. And I wonder if I should also smoke a little weed, or if I'm getting too old to be loading up with all these drugs. And then I click on Facebook for one last time today and learn that the great master of the button accordion, with as sweet a voice to ever sing a song, is now gone for good, amid a flurry of tearful emojis and testimonials. And I remember seeing him at a house concert a few years ago and thinking how no night of music was ever so enchanting and no one more mischievously extraordinary than he. And two more. Somebody, I think, mentioned Halloween. Was that you yesterday? Yeah. And so Samhain, the Feast of Samhain, I think, is usually thought to begin on the night of October 31st and continue into November 1st. So the church appropriated both of those as, Halloween and then All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day. And my birthday is All Saints' Day, so I've always been attracted to that whole time. Then this is called Samhain. I kind of hate Halloween, and that probably comes out here. So tonight the souls stir about the streets. They knock on our doors. They take the form of small children seeking chocolate. They are relentless. They laugh. They pretend they are innocent. The cat is terrified. She runs through the house at every knock, seeking shelter. We tell her this night belongs to her too. Her eyes light up in the dark. Witches and ghosts are back again with their eternal beseechments. They ring the doorbell. They laugh at us. They think we are fooled by their costumes. We heat up last night's chili with Swiss cheese on top. We wait for the unholy carousing to cease. We hear them laughing on the front steps. They've got us where they want us. We eat quickly, trying to stay invisible. There are graveyards on every other front lawn, giant spider webs. There are skeletons dancing in the yellow moonlight. So don't come to my house on Halloween. Okay, last poem, which is dedicated to Charlie, who, as probably a lot of you know, is a John Prine fan. So this is called Last Song. Mother, where have you been? Your children are drinking beer and playing the piano. Every single thing you ever owned has long ago disappeared. We're not even sure when exactly you were born or what ship you came here on. Sweet hope, show me the way out of this mess. I keep talking to people who can't remember who they are. And then there's this feeling of everything being just out of reach or not quite audible. I couldn't remember John Prine's name this morning on the way to the Safeway, listening to him in the car, singing Remember Me When the Candle Lights Are Gleaming with Kathy Mattea. His last song, I Remember Everything, so frail and beautiful, it moves you to tears. I remember now where all of you have gone, floating in the air from song to song. Thank you.
Oh, my goodness, what a wonderful day. I feel I've gone back to school, I've gone to church, I've gone to a session, all those good things. Thank you, Eamon. Thank you, Charlie, for being you, for being the wonderful human being you are, and for making my job that much easier by acknowledging that there is such a thing as Irish American literature, our own genre. And thank you, Sally. That was a little bit like being at your own wake. But I so appreciate it. So I thought that maybe I would just finish up one of the sections from Absolution that you were so kind to quote. This is, again, Tricia. It's 1963. She's a 23-year-old young wife married to Peter. They're in Saigon. Peter is there ostensibly as an engineer. I was talking to a woman who was with the CIA, and she told me that it was either engineer or economist, and everybody knew you were in the CIA. That's all you had to say. I'm an engineer, CIA. I'm an economist. Yeah, right. So he is an engineer. Tricia has been invited by Charlene, that pushy Episcopal spouse, American spouse, to come to Sunday service at the Episcopal Church in Saigon. And Tricia has told Charlene that we should have to clear it with Peter. After some initial doubt of the how will it look sort, Peter agreed to attend the Episcopal service, a gesture in keeping, he reasoned, with the good Pope's move toward a new word for us, ecumenical understanding, as long as we sat in the back and didn't receive communion, and went to the earlier Mass at the cathedral, of course. We would not have believed in those days that a Protestant Mass was a legitimate substitute for our Sunday obligation, mere bread and wine versus actual body and blood, mere ceremony versus miraculous transubstantiation, that sort of thing. The President of the United States was a Catholic then, and so still was the President of Vietnam and his family. Years later, really toward the end of his life, when he spoke about these things more freely, Peter told me how important it had been to him in those days that the U.S. was supporting a Catholic regime in Vietnam. There was, to his mind, then anyway, something divinely ordained about Diem and his brother, and even Madame Neu, as crass and vain as some of us found her. Personally, I never forgave her for her barbecue remark after the first Buddhist monk set himself on fire. What was it she'd said? One can't be responsible for the madness of others. And yet, she had banned contraception and abortion and closed the dance halls, as a good Catholic sovereign should. It was a rough alliance, Peter admitted, our shoring up the Diem regime, full of compromise, but an alliance that seemed to portend the redemption he so believed in then. Redemption not just for the Far East, but for all the world, for all of us in it. Before we were married, Peter's mother had shown me a small gift she was waiting to bestow, quote, when the time comes. It was a diaper pin. Does your generation even remember there was such a thing? With a pale blue plastic cover at the top and a tiny blue medal attached to the circle of steel at the bottom, a medal so small that it took me a moment to decipher it, an image of the Virgin Mary, a miraculous medal in the parlance of our times. Peter, she told me, had been dedicated to the Blessed Mother at his baptism and had worn this medal on his diapers until he grew old enough to wear a larger version around his neck. I was familiar with the larger version. He wore it every day under his clothes. I'm not sure, to be honest, what people know anymore. So much that was common knowledge back then is a cipher now. Do you know what I refer to when I say Fatima? A small village in Portugal where the Blessed Mother appeared on multiple occasions to 3 peasant children. This was during the First World War. The Virgin asked the children to tell the world to pray the rosary. She promised that if Russia could be consecrated to her Sacred Heart, communism and all its pernicious errors, atheism, materialism, war and persecution and moral confusion would be defeated. Satan's diabolical disorientation, as the nuns at Marymount used to put it, would not overwhelm us. Peter owned a copy of a full account of the apparition at Fatima, published in the late 1940s and written by a priest who seemed to have interviewed all the participants and witnesses, those still alive anyway. Peter brought the book to our first apartment. It was dog-eared, the spine nearly broken even then. It was one of the first books he asked me to read. And it led to one of our first spats. Early in the account, during one of the apparitions, Lucy, the oldest of the 3 children and the chief spokesperson, as would say now, asked the Blessed Mother about 2 little friends of hers who had recently died. Mary answered that one of the girls was with her in heaven, but the other was still in purgatory. I remember telling my friend Stella Carney about this when we met for lunch in Manhattan not long after Peter and I returned from our honeymoon. Stella was already expecting her first child, the culprit, as she called him, who had kept her from being the matron of honor at my wedding since, in those days, pregnant women were not allowed to walk down the aisle. Stella argued that it was highly unlikely that a small shepherd child in Portugal who had died so young could have sinned enough to earn herself a stint in purgatory. Maybe, Stella said in her own smarter-than-everyone way, the dead little girl had been a rival. And Lucy's report that the Virgin said the child had not yet made it to heaven was only a bit of petty, girlish revenge. Girls, especially Catholic girls, Stella added, can be so catty. Don't you and I know it, she said. That night, laughing, I told Peter about Stella's theory. He was not amused. In fact, he plucked the worn book from my hands, threatened to withhold it from me until I had gained some faith. I was a bit startled, but nevertheless full of regret. I loved him all the more for this unaccustomed glimpse into his very serious soul. Hard to understand it now, I suppose, but my husband, for all his education and his worldliness, the Navy, the Colorado School of Mines, law school, and Esso on Park Avenue, had a deep and abiding, old-fashioned kind of faith. God become man in the 7 sacraments, transubstantiation, our infallible Pope, and our immortal souls. His own life dedicated at birth to the Mother of God. He believed entirely in the promise of the apparition at Fatima, that Russia would be converted. He believed communism would be defeated in Russia, in China, here in Vietnam, not merely by the superior military power of the West, not even by mankind's own yearning to breathe free, but by the intercession of Mary. How peculiar it must seem to you, not only that Peter believed entirely in the promise the Virgin had made, but that he believed fully in the apparition itself, believed that the gentle Mother of God had appeared on earth in 1917 in the same body that had given birth in the very usual way to the Savior of the world. Thinking of Stella, my irreverent friend, I wonder now if Mary appeared at Fatima in a matronly body, A belly pouched by childbirth, downward turning breast, a laugh line or two? Or was it the trim, immaculate body she had inhabited before the angel appeared? A postpartum body or a pre? As I recall it, the priest account of the apparition at Fatima said the children claimed the lady was beautiful. But how to interpret that beauty now? How to gauge the opinion of children who had never seen a Disney princess or a Miss America or a dewy movie star on the silver screen? It seems quite possible that a mother's body, a mother's careworn face, would have been more beautiful to these peasant children than a slim teenage figure not unlike their own. I'm pretty sure that if there is indeed a resurrection of the body, as we Catholics are meant to believe, then my own mother will not appear at our reunion in the spectator shoes and permanent waves of her youth, but as I knew her in the brief time we shared, softly plump and weary-eyed, plain and dear. Faithful as he was, Peter believed that a Catholic regime in this small country, a charismatic Catholic president in our own country, were indications enough that Mary's promise, the hope she had offered in that spongy Portuguese grazing field, was slowly but inexorably moving towards its fulfillment. I guess you could say our sense that we were a part of the one true faith was pretty solid in those days. Or maybe I should say that mine was solid because I so trusted my husband to be right. I'm recalling now something Peter told me in this regard. Again, this was many years later. He said when he was first recruited for intelligence work, he was both intimidated and impressed by the men who were offering to make him a colleague. They were waspy Ivy Leaguers, uniformly fit, born to privilege and yacht clubs, and to his mind, old money. Old, he said, but still virile enough to keep reproducing itself effortlessly. That was Peter's sense of humor. Even the secretaries, he said, were beautiful girls from the best schools. Made him feel something like a clodhopper, was how he put it. And yet, he was told in an early interview by a man who had been recruited for the OSS by Wild Bill Donovan himself that it was Catholics they were seeking. Who better understood the threat of godless communism? In the middle of these conversations, Peter's interviewer had reached into his pocket and placed a black rosary on the desk before him. Wordlessly, Peter did the same. The Catholic Intelligence Agency was the joke. Someone told me that it was Catholics and Mormons who were most recruited because they could pass lie detector tests so well. And to finish off this lovely day and to give, as my own mother loved to say, the devil his due, and I'm not referring to Charlie, although I did ask if there are any stories about terrible things that Charlie has done, because we've had so many marvelous stories about the wonderful things he's done. He assured me that there are, but he didn't tell me any of them. So I'm just going to finish by giving the devil his due. This is also Tricia's voice. My mother was an information operator at what we still refer to in those days as the telephone exchange on 50th Street in Manhattan. She worked the night shift, leaving the house every afternoon as soon as my father and I were home from school, our dinner already made, waiting to be reheated, and returning in the early hours of the next day. Does it surprise you to know she rode the subway and a bus at that hour without fear, knew, in fact, each bus driver by name, an antique past for certain, something out of a fairy tale indeed. She was always there at breakfast with our lunches packed, the house clean, a funny story to tell about the night before, The crazy phone numbers people sought, the drunken confessions, even the dirty talk that she always met with an indignant, "You are no gentleman, sir." There were reoccurring characters in her tales, a crooning hobo, a hapless out-of-town businessman, a weary streetwalker, a lonely cop, even a guy at Rikers Island who always wanted the number for the mayor's bedroom at Gracie Mansion. And on full moon nights, she told us, Satan himself often called from a payphone on some cold, blue-shaded street deep in the stony caverns of Manhattan. My mother said she knew it was the devil by the sugary, sibilant way he always began. "I once had this number by heart, but it somehow slipped away." And by the chill in her spine after she had given him the number he sought, always with 2 digits transposed. Thank you.
So this winds up the show. Thank you very much. The next part will be book signings outside. Not outside. Outside the door. I want to thank you all for coming, particularly the speakers, and our sponsors, and the audience for coming on a beautiful Saturday. I think it's still beautiful. And of course, thanks to Eamon and thanks to Charlie. So enjoy, and can we give everybody another